Good morning, everyone. We are in chapter 7, Perek Zayin of Sefer Daniel. We're actually entering the second half of the Sefer. The first half of the Sefer were dreams that Daniel was interpreting for others. The second half of the Sefer are going to be dreams that Daniel has himself and is interpreting. It's important to remember that Daniel is not a Navi. He's not a prophet. He has Ruach HaKodesh, which allows, this divine inspiration. It is by definition a divine inspiration, which has room for interpretation within it. And even he himself does not fully understand everything applied. And we see it actually here in this parak in one of the more unusual dreams we will encounter. The dream actually being interpreted within the dream and then subject to more explanations than even the single page that I handed out to everyone can imagine. This is also a chapter that in Christian theology they find to be very important, and they find references to Yeshu, to Jesus, because in this chapter we talk about the four kingdoms. We also talk about the Barnash, the Son of Man, who steps in and is part of a messianic vision. We even have in here initial hints towards the idea of a date of when Mashiach will come, one that is subject to great debate. The Rambam rejects any attempts to do so. The Abarbanel does as well, and then gives his own date. And others give dates as well. Rashi gives a date as well. We'll see what plays out. None of those dates have played out. The Rambam's reasoning, obviously, opposing dates is because, unfortunately, when it doesn't work, people get disappointed, and then all of a sudden you find false messiahs arising within the Jewish people, something that we continue to encounter up until even modern times. So in chapter 7, Perek Zayin, we begin, Bishnat Chada leBelshazzar melech Bavel. Now, we've already encountered Belshazzar before. If you remember, Belshazzar is going to be the one who is murdered by one of his own people in anticipation of Daryavesh HaMadai, Darius the Mede, taking over. And Belshazzar, at the end of Belshazzar's reign, we had spoken of the fact that he was surrounded by the Persians and the Medes, and he thought he had thrown a feast because he thought he had succeeded, but in the end he would fall to them. This is the first year, though, however, of Belshazzar's reign. Daniel Chalem Chazah. Daniel dreamed a dream. Now, it's interesting, the Malbim points out, that normally, if you have a gerund and a noun together, normally they match, the verb noun matches. So normally you would say, you dreamed a dream in English. Here it's actually, you dreamed a vision. And so the Malbim says the reason why we don't say chalem chalom is because it's clear that this wasn't a typical dream, but rather this was a prophetic dream, and so therefore he dreamed a vision. And this was a vision in his head while he was lying down. What exactly this means? Well, according to the Medrash Daniel, he says that this wasn't something that he saw, but it was from the imagination within a person's head. It was fantastical. And therefore, it's not like he was seeing real life. He was seeing some kind of fantastic dream, something you could imagine in your head. Interesting, Reb Saadia Gaon, that says it's one more thing, that he saw something, a vision in his head while he was lying down, meaning it's something that you can remember. It's something that was stuck in his mind, as we would say. Well, he was sleeping, but when you're talking about dreaming, when you dream, you sleep. So why is it necessary to emphasize what kind of dream this was? Be'adayin chel machtav, and then he did something. Right away, okay, that same night, he wrote down the content of his dream. That's Rashi's explanation. His writing, though, was like he took notes for himself. Reish Milin Amar. And it contains really Reish Milin that ultimately it was just an outline that he prepared for himself, the key points that he wrote down in his dream. Anei Daniel ve'Amar. And now Daniel is talking, and he's reporting on this dream. Chazei haveit bechazvi im lelia. I saw this dream at night. Ve'aru arba ruchei shamaya, and behold, the four winds of the heavens, migichin leyama rabba. They were beginning to storm into the Great Sea, into the Mediterranean Sea. Now, whenever we talk about the four winds, we're talking as if the entire world is coming together. On the one hand, when you talk about the four winds, you're talking about four separate spaces. But here, those four separate spaces seem to converge on the sea itself. And it's, as Rashi says, it's like they're battling one with the next. There's a storm that's taking place between these four different winds. The Malbim says that ultimately what we're talking about, that there are, just like there are four winds, four directions, each of these various parts of the vision have their own time and place. It's not that they're occupying the same place. They've come and there's competition that's existing, but they will be able to exist. And in fact, we're going to see in the vision that three of the four descriptions, three of the four beasts that are going to be described are going to continue to survive. They're just going to fall from power in itself. Well, now, what did he see? V'arba chevan rav revan, four mighty beasts, Selkan Minyama, came out from the sea, Shanyan Dam Mingam. Each one of them was different than the next. Kadmaita. The first of these animals, was a lion. Vigapin dinashar la. I'm sorry. The Gapin dinashar la, and it had the wings of eagles. Now, actually, if you remember it, if you've seen these pictures, the Assyrian pictures, looks like a lion with wings. Okay, Nebuchadnezzar. This is one of the classic symbols. If you don't remember, just go to the Oriental Institute, and you'll see the gates for the cities, and you'll see these images all over the place. The Aru are, I'm sorry, and the Gapin dinashar lachazeh, Haved ad dimeritu gapam. It was until his wings were plucked. Unetilat min ara, and he was taken off of the earth. The al raglayin ke'enash hekimat, and he was made to stand on two legs like a human being. Ulevav enash yahidla. And he also had the heart of a person. This is the first beast. Now, to understand each of these pieces, obviously, the imagery of a lion is power. And it's power. It's a lion is the king of the beasts. So you have this powerful animal. The imagery of wings is speed. So it's a combination of both speed and power that exists. This is the Ralbag says very simply, this refers to Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar, or we're going to say Babylonia, which was able to conquer the world very rapidly. And so that's the combination of those two. Now, ultimately, he starts this way, but then his wings are plucked. What does it mean wings are plucked? That means he no longer is able to fly. He no longer has that speed, And according to Reb Saadia Gaon, what this means is that once he had done his initial piece, but then something stopped him. Now, if you remember, when we talked about Nebuchadnezzar early in the Sefer, there was a point where for 7 seasons, Shva Idanim, he was made like an animal. He was off the grid, whether it was 7 years, whether it was 7 seasons, however long that period was, he fell and he stopped being able to do. And that, Rashi says, is also the mashal for this fall of Babylon, which we're going to experience which we actually saw a bit, when we saw that Belshazzar was going to be killed. And next comes Persia and also Media and then Persia. Ultimately, he is taken from the earth. What is taken from the earth means? Well, again, you have this lion, he has this powerful position, you move him out. So it's moving him away from his power itself. He's standing as a human being. You take a lion, you stand him on 2 legs. What happens to the lion? The lion is not sure of himself at that point. The lion no longer has that power to move. Lion can fall. But you also say, not just he's standing on 2 legs, you compare him to Enash, like a person. When you compare a lion to a person, immediately you're saying he has been diminished. That power of the animal has become to be diminished. So one is he no longer has that ability to charge like he had, to run like he had. He can't do it with just 2 legs. And number 2 is at the same time, you're diminishing him. And then if you really want to diminish him, talk about the heart of a person. Okay, when we talk about, for example, imagery, Richard the Lion-Hearted, right? There was never a king who was ever called George the Person-Hearted, okay? But if you wanted to talk about someone powerful, you compared to lion. Compared to a person, again, Rashi saying the heart of a person, it's lashon chalshut. It's saying that he's been weakened along the period of time. Now, again, to go back to the imagery of Nebuchadnezzar himself at the end of those 7 seasons, this is where he had been diminished. So that's number 1. So we have some great image of a lion with wings. The wings are plucked. The lion is stood up on 2 legs and becomes human-like in some ways. The Aru, and behold, Cheva Achori Tinyana. There's a second animal, Damya Lidov, who's compared to a bear. Vilistar Chad Hakimat. And it's on one side. Utlat Il'in Bipuma Ben Shinam. And it has 3 ribs that it's eating, 3 large bones in its mouth that it's between its teeth. V'chein omrin lam, and they tell this bear, and the words are going to the bear. Oh, we don't know. It's poetic. In other words, there's a sound coming telling the bear, "Achuli besar sagi," eat a lot of meat. Now, what is the bear? The bear obviously is another fierce animal. You'll see on the chart, and I'll go over the chart in a moment. We're just going to start with Rashi. The bear is reminding us of Persia. And when we talk about Persia, we talk about the fact that Persia was really big on these feasts. Think about Achashverosh and all of his celebration and all of the eating that took place. And that's reminiscent of what's happening. But what does it mean? It's standing on one side. So according to Rashi, that ultimately, if you remember, and we mentioned this briefly, that when Belshazzar is going to be killed, when he's murdered, Darius the Mede is going to take over for just a year, and then Cyrus, the Persian, is going to take over after. Standing on one side, according to Rashi, means that this bear is coming, but not fully in force yet. It's somebody else starting for that 1 year. It's not standing all the way up. It's kind of like off to the side because the next empire has someone in between. Or Reb Sajagon says that ultimately it also means that for their first year, they didn't have control of a world empire. They only had a partial world empire. Now, what are the three tzlaim, the three ribs that it has in its mouth? Rashi says that this means that under Persia, there were always a number of different peoples or nations that were rebelling against it. They would rebel, they'd go peace, they would rebel and go peace. In other words, sometimes you're able to eat, sometimes it's coming out. The bones are in and out of the mouth. According to Rashi, says a second possibility, these three bones remind us of three of the kings of Persia, Cyrus, Achashverosh, and Dariavish. Now, the problem with only mentioning three with Rashi is we know there were more kings than just the three. The Malbim says, no, that what's happening here is that this new monarch, this bear, captures three other empires. It captures Babylonia, Assyria, and the Persian Median Empire. So it consists of three. The Reed suggests, and this is one of the best pieces, based on a Gemara in Brachos and Daf Nun Hey Amud Aleph, that it doesn't mean anything. That ultimately, sometimes when you're giving an image, you draw this image together, but there are just certain things that don't have great significance to it, and don't try to figure out exactly what it is. In his own words, the Reed says, "Ve'elu gimel tzlaot enam siman l'shum davar." These three ribs have no reference to anything. And it's based on, again, about Reb Shimon Bar Yochai said that ultimately, just like you can't have grain without the stalk and the chaff, so too a dream can't exist without certain things that just don't have any meaning for us. So we're not sure what those three ribs are. They could be meaningful. They could just be there. And they said, eat a lot of meat. It just means there's a lot of meat present. This is an empire that's going to have tremendous wealth. First comes the lion, the winged lion, then comes the bear, then third. Batar Dana, after that, Chazei Havet, I was seeing the Aru Achori, and I saw one more animal, Kinamar, it's a leopard. Vilagapin Arba, and it has four wings, the Ofal Gaba, of a bird on its back, the Arba'a Reshin Lechevta, and it has four heads. So a four-headed leopard with four wings, the Shaltan Yehivla, and it has the monarchy, it has the rulership. Now, what is this leopard? According to Rashi, if you look on the chart, it's Greece. Okay, Greece, Alexander the Great. The Malbim says that if you want to look at what it is, a leopard in some ways is faster and stronger than the lion. So it's a continuation of that first monarchy, Bavel, but even more. And he also identifies it as Alexander the Great. What are the four wings on the back? Now, Alexander, he conquered literally the whole world. So he went to the four winds of the earth, the four corners of the earth. And by doing so, he had that great strength and showing how much he was there. Reb Sanchagon says, actually, Alexander the Great, post-Alexander the Great, his empire was divided into four parts. You had the Ptolemies in Egypt. You had the Seleucids in Syria. You had Antigonus in Greece, and you had Philip, his son, in Macedonia. And so the four wings are talking about the four ways that his empire was divided up. The Abarbanel takes a very different approach, and he says, what were his four great strengths? He was a man of grace, of chesed. He was a man of strength, of gvura. He was a man of wisdom, of chokhmah. And he was a man of teshukah limshol. He wanted to rule. So he had the motivation, he had the wisdom, he had the grace, and he had the strength to do everything he wanted. He had four heads. This leopard has four heads. So Rashi says that that's referring to those four divisions he would ultimately have between the Ptolemies, the Seleucids, the Macedonians, and the Greeks. Okay. And he was given L'Shaltan Yahivle, he has this power that comes to him to rule. The Malbim says that he went ahead and he had that ability to bring all of these forces together of the other empires we talked about. He was the great consolidator of those. Fourth, now comes the last of the four visions. Ba'atar Dana, after that, we're in Pasuk Zayin. After that, Chazei Havet b'chezvei lelia. I saw in the vision of the night. Now, we've had a vision of the night. It's not just Andrew Lloyd Webber, but we had a vision of the night when we started. And that was, if you remember, right at the beginning in Pasuk Bet. The other times, we didn't introduce it the same way. The other times were just after that, I saw. So because of the fact that this is introduced as I had it in a vision of the night, Rashi says that ultimately this was another night. This was a multi-night dream that took place. And in fact, it could be that all four of these different animals came to him in dreams of different nights. But here Rashi says, if I introduce it all over again, like the beginning of the dream, that dream may have started. A new dream had started to build in the fourth of the beasts that he was going to see. However, the Ralbag says no. The Ralbag says this final beast is introduced with night because this beast is going to be the most terrible of them all. Just like nighttime is the most frightening time of a 24-hour day, so too is this beast going to be the most terrifying of the four. And what did he see? V'aru cheva reviyah. I saw the fourth animal. He's not describing this animal with a name. Dechila, that was frightening. The emtani, and there was ema, and there was awe. The takifa, and powerful yatira, more than all of the rest. The shinayin di barzel ravravan, and it had iron teeth, many iron teeth. And what did this beast do? Ochlam, it would eat anything in its path. Umedeka, and it would crush it. Usha'ara biragla rafsa, and whatever was left that it hadn't finished off with its mouth, it would trample. The mishanya, and it was different. The mishanya min kol chevata di kadma. From all, it was different than all of the other animals that came before it. The karnayin asarla, and it had 10 horns. Now, in terms of what this animal is, we don't know. Reb Sajagon suggests that this animal may have been like an elephant. It was so big and powerful of that nature. Rashi, though, says, what empire could this be talking about? We've talked about the Babylonians, we've talked about the Persians, we've talked about the Greeks. Rashi says this is the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire comes up, they're the fourth. Reb Sajagon, we'll get to it in a moment, a little more detail, says it's not the Roman Empire, it's the Muslim Empire. Okay? Now, Interesting. We'll see how those two play out in a moment. That's Reb Sajagon says it's the Muslims. Yeah.
To come together in the future in Tehillim, I think in Ayin talks about.
We talk about both of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things which we'll get to in a moment also goes back to the fact we also need to think about who's speaking and when are they speaking. If I'm talking about a vision that's talking about the future, can I imagine things that are not in the past or in the present or in the near future? Rashi didn't live under an oppressive Muslim regime. Rashi lived under an oppressive Christian regime. And so for him, the Holy Roman Empire was a player, was this next move that you have to be afraid of. If I look at Reb Sajagon and the Ibn Ezra, they lived under Muslim regimes. They lived under Muslim empires. Now, they weren't oppressive in the time of the Ibn Ezra, but they were the great. And it could be that those experiences influenced them, and we'll see even more along the way. Then you have, it has 10 horns. Now, what are the 10 horns? Rashi says that these 10 horns are the 10 kings of Rome that led up to Vespasian, who destroyed the Beit HaMikdash, under whose rule the Beit HaMikdash would be destroyed, the second Beit HaMikdash. The Mitzudat David is taking the position that it's talking about the Muslims. He says it's 10 kings there. The Malbim ultimately says that it's 10 monarchies that are going to join together with the Romans. So we really don't know 100% what these 10 horns represent. But what's fascinating is the next pasuk. Because in the next pasuk, Mistakal Haved, he says, I was watching, Daniel says, I'm looking, Bekarnaya at these horns, V'alu keren achori ze'era silkat benen. And all of a sudden, a small horn starts coming out between the other 10. Utlat min karnaya kadmayata. And 3 of the previous 10 horns, at akaram, they were uprooted min kadamam, from before that new horn. There was 1 horn pushed out 3. The alu, aine anasha bekarnada, and all of a sudden this one little horn developed an eye, like a human eye. Ufum mimalil ravravan, and it had a mouth that was talking a lot. Now, this little horn that we're talking about is also a question. In other words, when you have this 4th beast, it means something else is going to come later. There's something small that's going to start coming out of it. According to Rashi, this is Titus, the general Titus. Why Titus? You had the great empire of Rome. Titus is the general who's showing up. Titus goes ahead. Titus is blasphemous when he enters the Beit HaMikdash, the way he defiles the Beit HaMikdash. That's the mouth that talks a lot. It blasphemes things. And that's Rashi's explanation. Reb Sajagon, who says the 4th of empires are the Muslims, he says actually these are the Arabian Muslims, a new empire. And in comes the Abarbanel. The Abarbanel says that this small horn is the papacy, is the Pope. Why is it the Pope? The empire starts up. You become then the Holy Roman Empire. Then there's a Roman Pope who arises and becomes a power. The Abarbanel blames it on the Pope. That's that small one who blasphemes. Now remember the Abarbanel's experience. The Abarbanel lived through the expulsion. The Abarbanel watched the Inquisition. If you want to talk about this power that was the ultimate power of destruction for him, it makes sense that he's referring to the Pope. In the non-Jewish world, and remember, this has great importance, this parak, and we'll see it again. For the non-Jewish world, they actually say that this was a rebellion against the Pope because the Protestants, the Methodists, the Seventh-day Adventists view themselves as that little horn that's popping up in the picture, that they're rebelling against the Pope. Now, what's with the three horns that get displaced? So he's, according to the Reb Sajigon, there are three horns, meaning that there's going to be a rebellion of three nations: Israel, Egypt, and Africa, which ultimately are going to be under the Muslims. The Malbim says that these are ultimately the three groups that rebelled against the papacy, against the Pope: Islam, and also it might be the Protestants and the Methodists. Okay. And it has, again, the eye of a person. Okay. The Medrash Rabbah says that this is Ayin Ra'ah Shel Malchut HaRish'ah. It has an evil eye. The Rambam says that ultimately this one thing that's popping out, he says that this is a person who's going to appear like a prophet and is going to be blaspheming against God. In other words, false prophets. Now, if you look at the sheet I gave you, and I'll pull it up on the screen for those who didn't have a chance to print it out today. I just sent it this morning. So give me just a moment. I'll pull it up on screen. There are a lot of different approaches to what all of these pieces that we had. Okay, and so just to take, again, here it is on the screen. So just to go from the beginning, actually, okay, we've touched on Rashi's approach. Rashi's approach was that these four animals and that one horn coming out, the lion is Bavel, Aryeh. The bear is Persia. The leopard is Yavan. The fourth animal, the Chiva Reviam, is Rome. And that small little horn is Titus. Okay, as in the arch. Okay. Reb Sajigon and the Ibn Ezra, Rabbi Avram ben Ezra, start out the same way. Babylon, Persia, but they say the Greek and the Romans are really one. It's Greece, Yavan, and Rome. Then they say the fourth animal is the Muslims, Yishmael. And that small horn, he calls it Malchut Yishmael Baravaya, Arabian Islam. The Abarbanel starts out the same way, and he says he's the same as Rashi, but ultimately that small horn is the Pope, Memshelet Apifior, the rule of the Pope, the papacy. And then I'm going to skip to the last column on the left, which says Chokrim on the top, Bible scholars, and there is a tremendous amount on this in the non-Jewish Bible, not even non-Jewish, in the non-Masorah Bible scholars, those who don't accept the idea that the Tanakh is divine. And they have Canaanite legends that are similar to this, and they have all different kinds of legends that are similar to this. They say the first one is Babylonia, the second one are the Medes, the third one are the Persians, the fourth one, that animal is Greece and the Seleucids, and that little horn is Antiochus Epiphanes, the Antiochus from the Hanukkah story. They say it really stops at the Hanukkah story. And the reason why it stops at the Hanukkah story for them is they believe that Sefer Daniel was written in that time frame. And so Daniel only looks backwards and he's able to see where he's in. And this is really talking about this terrible time are the Seleucid Greeks, the Hanukkah people, and Antiochus. Yeah. Well, because we don't know what it's talking about. In other words, we know what we know from the text. Okay, if you just look at the text, we know we're talking about 4 different groups of power. Okay, oppressive groups. We'll see that that God is going to enter into this story, and there's going to be angels, and there's going to be a person, which sounds like a Mashiach, a Messiah showing up. But because there's nothing more identifying the historical era, the best we can do on this is have theories. Even Daniel didn't understand it immediately. So to give it an easier way of explaining it, the easiest of them all, really, and almost everyone agrees to this, is the lion with the wings, because a lion with wings is an image that was clearly Babylonian, that was used. Everything else, we're not really sure of. So the bear, okay, well, it is true that the bear, Persia, and Media in the Gemara are referred to as a gluttonous bear in the Medrash. So maybe that's them. But then you get to, what do you do next? And how far are you going to go? So for example, if you look in those 2 columns I skipped, and I'm going to go one from the left, Rav Meidan, who's one of the Rosh Yeshivas in Yeshivat Har Etzion, he says, no, this isn't 4 monarchies. These are really rulers. Nebuchadnezzar, the next one, Avil Merodach, we encountered, the next one, Belshazzar. The 4th is all-encompassing, is Paras, Persia, that's going to conquer Babylonia. And that little horn popping up from out of nowhere is Alexander the Great. The advantage of Rav Meidan's approach is that the 4 beasts all represent things that Daniel had experience with. So he's describing what was or what is in the dream. And he is foretelling in the dream there's going to be a challenge, Alexander the Great. Rav Yoel Ben Nun actually says, no, that this is all talking about the Persian era, and it's referring not to any monarchies or empires. It's just referring to 4 kings, Artaxerxes the first, that's Artaxerxes the first, Darius the second, Artaxerxes the second, Artaxerxes the third, and Darius the third. Okay, and he says that his opinion is based on a pasuk, which we haven't gotten to yet, where it actually refers to them not as 4 empires, but 4 kings. So he takes it out of that. Rav Meidan's explanation I copied for you on the bottom of the page. I cut out a lot of pieces, but you can see the whole original there. And Rav Yoel Ben Nun's piece, again, I edited it down a little bit. It comes from the 929 site. I have the website for you as well. It's in Hebrew at the bottom. So the reason for the machloket is the ambiguity of a dream. The reason why, the enabler of it is that we don't have in the text a clear explanation of it. We know evil, another one is even more evil, more evil, more evil. All of them seem to be all powerful, each in their own time. And we're trying to figure out what can it refer to. If Daniel had told us the bear is this and this is this, then there wouldn't be room for conversation.
Can I?
Yeah, there was a question? Yes, Shoshi.
Yeah. So I think it makes sense to me that it's ambiguous, because the whole point is that it can be for any generation at any time. It doesn't have to have one fixed meaning. It can be all of this.
Well,
depending on what our need for the interpretation is.
So it's interesting. What you're building on actually is something from one of your teachers, Rav Bachrach, Yoshua Bachrach, okay, who always would talk about what the Gemara talks about, that any sefer of Tanakh has to have eternity of meaning.
Yes.
Okay. And as a result of it, the question comes, what is the eternal meaning on this? Is it the description of these lions, of these beasts? Is it going to be the second half where we're going to talk about God stepping in and God judging and a Messiah and ultimately the future of the Jews. Maybe all of this is one way, and we're not talking about future empires. Maybe the whole point of why this parak is important to us in the future is what happens next. So we don't know, but you are right. It can be, as it can also be an issue that whatever is written has to be have eternal meaning, and so it can be ambiguous for that purpose. I'm not sure, but I'm not sure 100% that we would say, because otherwise, anytime there's a prophecy which isn't ambiguous and isn't available for future generations, and part of the question is, well, why is it in the Tanakh? Okay. So we have the four, we have that small horn, and we're in Pasuk Tet. Pasuk Tet is very strange. Chazei Havet. Daniel says, I'm watching this, I'm seeing this. Adi Karsavan Remiv Va'atik Yomin Yativ. Until the chairs are literally being thrown around and the ancient one sits down. Now, Reb Saadia Gaon, what it says, what do you mean the chairs are being thrown around? Their thrones are being cast off. And along comes the ancient one who is God. Rashi says, actually, what's happening here is the chairs are being thrown around because we're doing a new setup. There's a new setup of the room that's happening. One is going to be a chair to serve for the judge over the Avodah Zarah, over the idolatry. One is going to be a chair set up to judge the Jews favorably. It's also possible the chairs are going to be set up because we'll see that there's going to be hosts of angels who are going to come into the picture. But the ancient one sits down. The ancient one sits down sounds right away like HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He is shown as an ancient one, according to the Mitzudot David, because we want to show that God is a merciful one. We normally imagine in our minds this picture of the elder sage, the elder of the coming in, who has that sense of perspective and of rachamim. Levushe, and he's clothed, kitlag chivar, or his clothing are like white snow. In other words, he's clothed all in white. Usa'ar reshe, and his hair, ka'amar nekeh, is like clean wool. Karsiye, shivivin dinor, his seat has sparks of fire coming from it. Galgiloi nur dalik, and there are wheels on this chair. It's like a chariot, in other words, and they are a fire. Why are they a fire? Well, one possibility, the Malbim says, it's preparing for destruction, destroying the evil. Interestingly, the Ibn Ezra says it's because when the chariots are going really fast, there's sparks that come out from under the wheels. Remember, they're not talking about rubber wheels in those days. Nahar Dinur, there is a river of fire. Naged, the nafek min kadamoy, coming and going from before him. Elef alfim yesham shunei, there are 1,000 thousands who are serving him. Viribo revivei, and 10,000s of 10,000s, revivai, I'm sorry, myriads of myriads, kadamoy yakumun, are rising up. Dina yativ, he is sitting in judgment. V'sifrin p'tichu, and the books are open. Now, we're in Chodesh Elul. As soon as you hear about the books are open, you know this is the books of life and death. They're going to be open before the Atik Yomin, before the ancient one. Yeah.
What did we just learn in 9 and 10?
What?
9 and 10.
9. So what 9 and 10 are describing, we describe these horrific beasts that are out there. as those horrific beasts are doing all their stuff, all of a sudden, there's a tumult. And now God enters the room. He sits down. He's getting ready. He has all of his heavenly hosts surrounding him. And he's getting ready to judge. And the picture we're giving of this is this elderly sage. You know, if you think about Michelangelo pictures, you never see God as the young guy, right? God is the old guy with the big beard. Okay, that's the same picture Daniel is providing for us. We look at God as a sage. You know, you have the person walk in with the big white beard. It implies status. It implies age and wisdom. It implies also a certain hadras panim, a certain countenance of vision. Now, God enters into the picture, and what happens? At that same time that God enters in, Chazeh, we're in Posuk Yud Aleph, Chazeh Avet, I'm looking, Badayin, and then Min Kol Milaya Ravravata. There is this big noise, Dikarna Mimalela, from this speaking horn, Chazeh Havet, and I'm looking, Adi Ketilat Chevta Vuhuvad Gishma, until this horrific fourth animal is killed, its body is destroyed, V'yehivat likedat esha, and it is thrown into a fire. In other words, this fourth most fearsome of the beasts is incinerated, it's destroyed and incinerated. Now, if you remember that we're talking about either the Roman Empire who destroyed the Beit HaMikdash, we're talking about the Muslims who persecuted the Jews, whoever we're talking about, even if we're talking about the Seleucids, you know, at the time of the Hasmoneans, or we're even talking about Artashashta III, who was not a friend of ours, all of them are these horrific enemies. God comes on the scene, they're destroyed. Ushar Chevata, and the other three animals, Hediv Shaltanhon, their rulership was passed over, in other words, was moved, they no longer are in power. Ve'archa v'chayim, and they continued to live, Yehivat Lahon was given to them, Adzman ve'idan, until later on, till a later point, Rashi says, until a specific time in the future, according to Rashi, until the time of Armageddon, of the Milchemet Gog uMagog. Now, it is, according to the Data Mikrai, suggests that these other three monarchs are given their power until the fifth monarchy, until the new person, that horn, shows up on the scene and takes over. At the same time, Chazeh Havet, now Daniel keeps on looking. The Chazvei Lelia, now it's a vision of the night. If we take Rashi's approach of before, this is like a new dream that builds on part 3 of the dream. Va'aru im ananei shemaya, and behold, with the clouds of the heaven, kivaranash atehava, a human being comes. Va'ad atik yomaya metan, he comes right up to God. V'kadmohi hikrivuhu, and they bring him there. Now this Barnash, this person, Rashi says, is the Melech HaMashiach. Okay, this is the Messiah, shows up on the scene now. Now, interestingly, right away you see, if you want to think about it for a minute, we talked about 4 great empires, 1 rising empire, that single horn. We talked about God, and then we talk about a person. The Dat Mikra points out that the first 4 being animals or beasts is actually talking about their character. If you want to talk about the humanity That's the Melech HaMashiach. It's not this fearsome beast, it's a person who steps on the scene. Now, it is interesting, it says kivar enash, like a human being. The Ibn Ezra says that's nothing, that this is, he's just describing, what I saw, I could have sworn I saw a person. He doesn't say I saw a person, but it's like, so he says, don't worry about that. Says the Gemara in Sanhedrin, the Mashiach is going to come in one of two ways. If we deserve Mashiach, he's going to come with the clouds of the heavens. If we don't deserve Mashiach, he's going to show up like an impoverished person riding on a donkey. So this symbolism of Daniel plays a very important piece. For the Christians, this is the second coming. Actually, it's not even the second coming, it's the first coming. It's the first coming. This is Yeshu, this is Jesus shows up on the scene. He is the Son of Man. They use that imagery themselves. Okay, he's Son of God and Son of Man. He has this whole piece. It's Kibar Enosh, looks like a man for the Christians. All this plays into their theology. We reject it, obviously, completely. V'lei Yahiv Shaltan Vikaru Malcho. And to this person, the Mashiach, he's going to be given the rulership, he's going to be given honor, and he's going to be given the monarchy. V'chol amamaya umaya v'lishnaya, and all of the nations of the world, they'll serve him. Shaltanei Shaltan Alam. His reign will be forever. Di lo ya'adeh, which will never be removed. Umalchutei di lo titchabal. And his malchut will never be destroyed. Here is the Mashiach. We're going to stop with the Mashiach. We'll pick it up next week. And we'll finish off the dream. And please God, everything should be good. So everyone should have a wonderful, wonderful week. And we will continue to learn as we need to learn about the Melech HaMashiach and when he's coming next week.